The leather-bound Bible fell open in Beatrice Dunne's hands, revealing a faded photograph of a young man in uniform that she quickly pressed to her heart. Knowing her late husband Edward would never again feel the warmth of the new shirt she was sewing for the coming winter, a tradition that had unexpectedly created whispers throughout Pine Creek about the young widow and the patient cowboy waiting his turn. Pine Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1876. Beatrice stared at the photograph a moment longer before tucking it back between the Bible's pages. 3 years since Edward had been laid to rest after that terrible mining accident, yet she still sewed a new shirt each winter, a habit born from love, continued through grief, and now transformed into something she wasn't quite ready to name. The knock at her door came precisely when she expected it. Zachary Miller always arrived at 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoons, ostensibly to deliver supplies from the general store where he worked when not out with the cattle. His broad shoulders filled the doorframe as she opened the door. "Afternoon, Mrs. Dunne," he said, removing his hat. His dark hair had a persistent cowlick that refused to be tamed, and at 28 he had laugh lines already forming at the corners of his blue eyes. "Got your flour and sugar here," and Mr. Parker threw in some peppermint sticks for little Thomas. "How thoughtful," Beatrice replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Thomas will be delighted. He's napping now, thank goodness. The boy has more energy than sense some days." Zachary set the supplies on her kitchen table. "Boys tend to, Mrs. Dunne. I was the same at 4 years old, according to my mother." Beatrice smiled, watching as Zach's eyes drifted to her sewing basket in the corner, where Edward's no, not Edward's. She corrected herself where the new shirt was taking shape, its forest green fabric contrasting with the pale blue of her sitting room walls. "How's the sewing coming along?" he asked, though they both knew it wasn't really what he wanted to ask. "Fine," she answered, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Should be finished before the first snow." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Zachary had been Edward's friend, one of the few who'd pulled double shifts to search for survivors after the mine collapse. He'd been the one to carry Edward's body out and had been checking on Beatrice and Thomas ever since, first out of duty to his friend, then out of something neither of them acknowledged aloud. "The harvest dance is coming up," he said suddenly, his fingers worrying the brim of his hat. "Town council's hoping you might help with the decorations again this year." Beatrice folded her hands in front of her. "I suppose I could. Thomas enjoys the festivities." "And you, Mrs. Dunne, do you enjoy them?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Zachary Miller was usually more careful with his words. I haven't given it much thought," she admitted. "Perhaps you should." His eyes held hers for a moment before he looked away. "Well, I should be going. Cattle need tending before sundown." Beatrice nodded, following him to the door. "Thank you for the delivery, Mr. Miller, Zach," he said quietly. "After all this time, you could call me Zach." She hesitated. Using his Christian name felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. "Zach," she finally said, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. "Thank you." His smile was quick but genuine. "See you at church on Sunday, Beatrice." After he left, Beatrice returned to her sewing, her fingers trembling slightly as she threaded her needle. The town had been talking for months, she knew. The widow Dunne and Zachary Miller, the way he looked at her when she wasn't watching, the way she saved her best pies for when he came calling. And now there was the shirt everyone knew she'd sewn one for Edward every winter of their marriage. The green fabric wasn't Edward's color at all. It was the shade that brought out the blue in Zachary's eyes, a fact she'd noticed last Christmas when Mrs. Parker had given him a scarf in that exact hue. "Mama," Thomas's sleepy voice called from the small bedroom they shared. "Is Mr. Miller gone already?" Beatrice set aside her sewing and went to her son. The boy's dark hair was tousled from sleep, his eyes so like his father's blinking up at her. "Yes, sweetheart, but he brought you peppermint sticks from Mr. Parker." Thomas sat up excitedly. "Can I have one now, please?" After supper, she said, smoothing his hair. Tell me, would you like to go to the harvest dance next week? Will Mr. Miller be there? He promised to teach me how to lasso. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. I imagine he will be, yes. Then I want to go. Thomas declared, throwing his small arms around her neck. And you'll wear your pretty blue dress, and we'll dance, and Mr. Miller will dance with you like at the spring social. She held her son close, remembering that evening in April when Zachary had finally convinced her to join one dance. The town had watched and whispers had followed, but in that moment, with his hand steady at her waist, Beatrice had felt something other than grief for the first time in years. We'll see, she murmured into her son's hair. The following days passed in a flurry of work. Besides her regular duties as laundress for several of the town's bachelors, Beatrice found herself embroiled in harvest dance preparations. She worked alongside other ladies from town, crafting paper decorations and arranging for music and refreshments. Mrs. Thornton, a gossipy woman with more opinions than sense, sidled up to Beatrice as they hung paper garlands in the town hall. That's a mighty fine piece of sewing I saw in your basket the other day when I dropped by, she remarked with false casualness. Seems a touch large for young Thomas. Beatrice concentrated on securing the garland. It's just a project to keep my hands busy. Indeed, Mrs. Thornton raised an eyebrow. Curious timing with winter approaching. I remember how proud Edward was of those shirts you made him. Mrs. Thornton, Beatrice said evenly, I believe the refreshment committee was looking for your expertise on the punch recipe. The older woman huffed, but took the dismissal for what it was. As she walked away, Clara Jenkins, one of the few women Beatrice considered a friend, approached with sympathy in her eyes. Don't mind her, Clara said softly. People will talk no matter what you do. They already are, Beatrice sighed. The shirt was supposed to be private. Clara adjusted a crooked decoration. Is it for who everyone thinks it's for? Beatrice's hands stilled. I don't know, maybe. It's complicated, Clara. Love usually is, her friend replied with a gentle smile, especially the second time around. Who said anything about love? Beatrice whispered, but Clara had already moved on to help another lady with the bunting. That evening, as Thomas slept peacefully, Beatrice took out the shirt again. It was nearly finished, just the buttons and final hemming remained. She ran her fingers over the neat stitches, remembering Edward's appreciation for her handiwork, the way he'd kiss her after trying on each new shirt. Edward had been 20 when they married, she just 18. They'd had 5 good years together before the accident. He'd been a kind husband, a loving father, and losing him had nearly destroyed her. Only Thomas had kept her moving forward, but Zachary, he was different from Edward. Where her husband had been boisterous and impulsive, Zachary was thoughtful and steady. Edward charged into life head first. Zachary considered his steps. Both good men, both important to her in vastly different ways. A tear splashed onto the green fabric, and Beatrice quickly wiped it away before it could stain. Was she betraying Edward by making this shirt for another man? Or was this Edward's final gift to her, a friend who had become something more, a man who looked at her son as if he were precious? The night of the harvest dance arrived crisp and clear. Beatrice wore her blue dress as Thomas had requested, and the boy himself was scrubbed clean and vibrating with excitement as they walked the short distance to the town hall. The building was transformed with autumn leaves, paper decorations, and lanterns casting a warm glow over everything. A small band played in the corner, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Thomas immediately spotted some friends and ran off to play after extracting a promise from his mother that she wouldn't leave without introducing him to Mr. Miller. "You look beautiful," came a familiar voice from behind her. Beatrice turned to find Zachary standing there, more polished than she'd ever seen him. His usual work clothes were replaced by a pressed shirt and vest, his boots shined to a gleam. "Thank you," she managed, her throat suddenly dry. "You clean up well yourself, Zach." His smile at her use of his name made her heart skip. "Would you care to dance, Beatrice?" She hesitated only a moment before nodding. I would like that. As he led her onto the dance floor, she was acutely aware of the eyes following them, the conversations pausing as they passed. Zachary seemed oblivious, or perhaps he simply didn't care what others thought. Ignore them, he murmured as his hand found her waist. They'll find something new to talk about by next week. And what will they talk about tonight? She asked as they began to move to the music. How the handsomest cowboy in Pine Creek is dancing with the prettiest widow, he replied with a wink that made her laugh despite herself. They danced 3 songs before Thomas found them, demanding his turn to show Mr. Miller the new steps he'd learned. Zachary obliged with good humor, even allowing Thomas to stand on his boots as they moved around the floor together. Later, as the evening wound down and Thomas dozed against her shoulder, Zachary offered to walk them home. It's not necessary, Beatrice protested weakly. I insist, he said, taking the sleeping boy from her arms with practiced ease. This little buckaroo is heavier than he looks. They walked in comfortable silence, the autumn night wrapping around them like a blanket. At her door, Zachary carefully transferred Thomas back to her. I'll put him to bed and be right back, she whispered, disappearing inside. When she returned to the porch, Zachary was leaning against the railing, gazing up at the stars. Beautiful night, he commented as she joined him. It is, she agreed, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. Beatrice, he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. I've been patient. I know you needed time after Edward, and I would never rush you, but I can't help wondering if there might be a chance for us someday. The question hung between them like a tangible thing. Beatrice looked at this man who had become such a steady presence in her life, who cared for her son, who waited each week for a glimpse of a shirt he believed would never be his. I've been thinking about that too, she admitted. It's not simple, Zach. Edward was, I know what Edward was to you, he interrupted gently. I'm not asking to replace him. I'm just asking if there might be room for me too. Beatrice took a deep breath. The shirt, she said suddenly, the one everyone's been gossiping about, it's almost finished. Confusion flickered across his face. What does that have to do with it's green, she continued. Dark green like the pines up on the ridge. Edward always wore blue, said it reminded him of the sky he could see from the mine entrance. Understanding dawned in Zachary's eyes. And who is the green shirt for Beatrice? Instead of answering, she reached for his hand. I need more time, Zach, not much, but some. Can you wait a little longer? He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I've waited 3 years, Beatrice Dunne. I can wait a while more. The following Sunday, Beatrice sat in church with Thomas beside her, acutely aware of Zachary's presence several pews back. Reverend Philip spoke of renewal and second chances, words that seemed directed specifically at her, though she knew they weren't. After the service, as people gathered on the church steps to socialize, Clara pulled Beatrice aside. Have you given any thought to what we discussed? She asked. Beatrice nodded. More than thought, I've nearly made up my mind. Clara squeezed her hand. Edward would want you to be happy, you know. He wasn't the type to expect you to mourn forever. I know, Beatrice said softly. That's what makes it both easier and harder. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the road. A wagon had overturned, and several men, including Zachary, were rushing to help the driver, who appeared to be trapped beneath it. Without thinking, Beatrice ran toward the scene, her heart in her throat as she watched Zachary and others strain to lift the heavy wagon. Thomas followed close behind, his small face pinched with worry. Stay back. Someone called to the gathering crowd as the men coordinated their efforts. With a massive heave, they lifted the wagon enough for 2 men to pull the driver free. The crowd exhaled collectively when the injured man moved his limbs, clearly alive though bloodied. As Dr. Mason examined him, Zachary stepped away, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool autumn air. His eyes found Beatrice's, and the fear he must have seen there made him cross to her immediately. Are you all right? He asked, his hands hovering near her arms as if uncertain whether to touch her. I was worried, she admitted. When I saw you run toward danger, I'm fine, he assured her, finally allowing his hands to rest lightly on her shoulders. Just doing what needed doing. Thomas tugged at Zachary's jacket. You were brave, Mr. Miller, like a real hero, Zachary chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. Not a hero, just a neighbor helping out. That's what we do here in Pine Creek. The simplicity of his statement, the complete lack of pretense, struck Beatrice forcefully. This was who Zachary was, a man who helped because it was right, who cared without expectation, who had waited patiently for years while she healed. Would you come for supper tonight? She asked abruptly, surprise registered on his face. I'd be honored. 6 o'clock, she said firmly, then took Thomas's hand. We need to get home and prepare. As they walked away, Beatrice could practically feel the town's eyes on her back, could imagine the fresh round of gossip her invitation would inspire. For once, she didn't care. At home, she set Thomas to picking vegetables from their small garden while she prepared a roast she'd been saving. As the afternoon progressed, she found herself moving to the sewing basket repeatedly, taking out the green shirt and working on it in spurts between cooking tasks. By 5:30, the shirt was complete, the last button sewn on, the final hem perfectly straight. Beatrice held it up, examining her handiwork critically before folding it carefully and wrapping it in brown paper. Thomas helped set the table, chattering excitedly about showing Mr. Miller his new wooden horse and the trick he'd taught their dog, Rusty. Beatrice listened with half an ear, her mind occupied with what she planned to say when she presented the shirt. The knock came promptly at 6. Zachary stood on her porch with freshly combed hair and a small bouquet of late wildflowers. For the table, he said, offering them to her. They're lovely, she replied, ushering him in. Thank you. Supper was a lively affair, with Thomas dominating the conversation and Zachary responding to each story with genuine interest. Beatrice watched them interact, saw how naturally Zachary guided the boy's enthusiasm without dampening it, how respectfully he answered questions most adults would dismiss. After the meal, when Thomas reluctantly went to bed with promises of a lassoing lesson from Zachary the following week, Beatrice brought out coffee and apple pie. This is nice, Zachary said, looking around her small, tidy kitchen. Reminds me of when I was a boy before my mother passed. She made everything feel like home. You were young when you lost her, Beatrice observed, remembering fragments of his past he'd shared over the years. 12, he confirmed. My father did his best, but he was more comfortable with cattle than children. I grew up fast. Yet you're so good with Thomas, she said, sliding a piece of pie toward him. Zachary's smile was warm. He makes it easy, smart boy, kind heart, like his mother. Beatrice felt her cheeks heat at the compliment. I have something for you, she said suddenly, reaching for the package she'd placed on the sideboard earlier. It's not much, but she placed the brown paper bundle in front of him. Zachary looked at it, then at her, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Go ahead, she urged. Open it. His large, capable hands were surprisingly gentle as he unwrapped the package, folding the paper back to reveal the dark green shirt. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, his fingers tracing the even stitches along the collar. Beatrice, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Is this for you, she confirmed. If you want it, if I want it, he repeated with a small, incredulous laugh. I've been watching you sew for 3 years, dreaming of the day you might make something for me. Of course I want it. He stood, shaking out the shirt and holding it against his chest. It would fit perfectly. She'd been careful with the measurements, discreetly noting his dimensions during their interactions. May I? He asked, gesturing toward her bedroom door. She nodded, and he disappeared briefly to change. When he emerged wearing the green shirt, something settled in Beatrice's heart. He looked right in it, as if the garment had been waiting for him all along. How does it feel? She asked, rising to check the fit around his shoulders. Like a beginning, he answered, catching her hands in his. Beatrice, I need to be clear about something. This shirt, what does it mean to you? To us, she took a deep breath. In Pine Creek, everyone knows I sewed Edward a shirt each winter. It was our tradition, something special between us. When I started this one, I wasn't sure what I was doing or why. But halfway through, I realized I was sewing it for you, Zach. Not because you're replacing Edward, but because you've earned your own place in our lives. And what place is that? He asked softly, his eyes never leaving hers. Whatever you want it to be, she replied honestly. Thomas adores you. And I care for you, Zach, more than I thought possible after losing Edward. He drew her closer. I love you, Beatrice, have for years now. I love Thomas too, like he was my own. I don't expect you to say it back yet, but I needed you to know. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. Edward will always be part of me, she warned. Part of Thomas. As he should be, Zachary assured her. I would never want to erase him from your lives, but I'm hoping there's room for new memories alongside the old ones. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. There is, she whispered. There has been for some time now. When he kissed her, it was gentle and undemanding, a promise rather than a claim. Beatrice felt something long dormant bloom in her chest, not the passionate whirlwind she'd known with Edward, but something steadier, deeper, like the rivers that carved the valley where Pine Creek nestled. What happens now? She asked when they parted. Now, Zachary said, his smile lighting his eyes, we take our time, court properly if you'll allow it, give Thomas a chance to adjust to the idea, and when you're ready, truly ready, I'll be here. The town will talk, she warned. Let them, he shrugged. They've been talking for years anyway. Might as well give them something worth gossiping about. Winter arrived early that year, the first snow falling in late October. Beatrice watched it from her window, Thomas pressed against her side, both of them wrapped in a quilt her grandmother had made. Will Mr. Miller still come today? Thomas asked, his breath fogging the glass. If the snow lets up, she promised, though privately she wondered if the weather would keep Zachary at the ranch where he worked. Her doubts proved unfounded. Just after noon, they heard the jingle of harness bells, and Thomas raced to the door to find Zachary on their porch, his hat and shoulders dusted with snow, leading a small pony on a lead rope. Is that, Thomas began, his eyes wide with disbelief. Yours, if your mother approves, Zachary said, stomping snow from his boots. He's gentle as a lamb, perfect for learning. Thomas turned pleading eyes to his mother. Please, Mama, I'll take good care of him. Beatrice tried to look stern, but her face betrayed her. You discussed this with me first, she accused Zachary, though there was no real anger in her tone. Guilty, he admitted. But look at that face. How could I say no? The three of them spent the afternoon in the barn Beatrice had converted to a laundry after Edward's death. Zachary showed Thomas how to brush the pony named Copper for his reddish coat and explained the responsibilities of ownership. As darkness fell, Beatrice invited him to stay for supper. The meal was simple but hearty, and afterward, Thomas insisted Zachary read him a bedtime story. Just one, Beatrice conceded, watching as her son led Zachary to the small bedroom, chattering about his favorite book. When Zachary emerged 20 minutes later, his expression was soft. He fell asleep halfway through the story, he reported. Excitement of the day, I suppose. You spoil him, Beatrice said, but her tone was affectionate. I can't help it, Zachary admitted, joining her by the fire. He makes it too easy. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. You're wearing the shirt, she observed, noting how the firelight made the green fabric glow warmly against his skin. Every chance I get, he confirmed. Mrs. Parker asked if I'd had it made in Denver. I told her no, that it was made by the finest seamstress in Wyoming Territory. Beatrice smiled at the compliment, and what did she say to that? She said I was a lucky man. Zachary reached for Beatrice's hand, interlacing their fingers, and she was right. 6 months later, as spring painted the hills around Pine Creek with wildflowers, Beatrice Dunne became Beatrice Miller in a simple ceremony at the church. Thomas stood proudly as his mother's escort, solemnly presenting her to Zachary at the altar. The town turned out in force, their earlier gossip transformed to genuine well wishes. Even Mrs. Thornton dabbed tears away as the couple exchanged vows. That evening, in the home they now shared, Zachary having moved his things from the bunkhouse at the ranch where he'd been promoted to foreman, they sat on the porch swing watching Thomas chase fireflies with Rusty. "Happy?" Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders. Beatrice leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath the chambray work shirt she'd made him for his birthday the month before. "Very," she assured him. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I am looking forward to winter," she looked up at him, puzzled. "Why's that?" His grin was boyish and mischievous. "Well, Mrs. Miller, I hear you make the finest shirts in the territory, and I'm told husbands get one every winter." Beatrice laughed, the sound carrying across the yard and making Thomas turn and wave. "Is that so, Mr. Miller? And what color would you prefer this year? Surprise me," he said, drawing her closer. "We have all the time in the world." As twilight deepened around them, and the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From grief to healing, from friendship to love, from a widow sewing alone to a wife creating for a family restored. Edward would always live in her heart and in their son. But here, now, with Zachary's strong arm around her and Thomas's laughter filling the air, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found her way home again. And when winter returned, she would sew a new shirt for her husband, this time without sadness, without guilt, only love and gratitude for the patient cowboy who had waited his turn.